What a beginning! Two fortissimo chords like hammer strokes, and then immediately the main subject of the symphony's first movement. And what a symphony! In 1804, at its first performance in Vienna, it was the longest ever written up to then, lasting about 50 minutes. But it was not only its length which irritated the public in those days. It was also the sheer wealth of musical ideas together with the rapid switches of emotional content. In the first movement, for instance, heroic and lyrical passages stand side by side. In the second, the funeral march, reminiscences of past triumphs lighten up its basically dark mood. And in the scherzo and finale, there are even playful elements. What a variety of expression! But without doubt, a heroic vein runs throughout this symphony. Heroic, that implies determination, no compromise, and already those first chords symbolize this. With them, we also immediately get a picture of Beethoven as he was, self-assured, energetic, strong-willed. The traditional idea of heroism may seem slightly antiquated, but what remains valid today is a human attitude which derives from this idea. The determination to be autonomous, to free oneself from all conventions, whether in social contexts or the arts. And so what manifests itself in the Eroica is a plea for freedom. Beethoven believed strongly in the ideas of enlightenment and the French Revolution, above all the ideal of freedom for the individual. Already as a young man at the university in Bonn, he had become familiar with these ideas, and he stayed faithful to them all his life. There was one person who seemed to him to guarantee their survival after the chaos of the French Revolution: Napoleon Bonaparte. That's why Beethoven originally planned to dedicate the Eroica to him. But in 1804, Napoleon declared himself emperor. Here is a picture of the coronation ceremony. As you can see, the Pope, sitting behind Napoleon, was not amused. Neither was Beethoven. In fact, he was so disillusioned and enraged that he cancelled the dedication. He tore up the first page of the score. His pupil Ferdinand Ries wrote about this. I was the first to bring him the news that Napoleon had declared himself emperor. Thereupon he flew into a rage and cried out, "So he too is nothing but an ordinary being. Now he too will trample on all the rights of man, and only indulge his ambitions." Beethoven went to the table, seized the title page from the top, tore it up completely and threw it on the floor. The first page was written out anew, and only then the symphony received the title Sinfonia Eroica. There is no need to doubt the truth of this story, and so we can say today, the most famous dedication in the whole history of music is the one that was torn up. To complete the picture, it should be mentioned that Beethoven's relationship towards Napoleon remained ambivalent. When Napoleon died in 1821, Beethoven called it a catastrophe, and he mentioned that he had long ago already composed the appropriate music. With this statement, he can only have referred to the funeral march of the Eroica. Certainly, Beethoven's ambivalent relationship to Napoleon was one of the very few inconsistencies in his life. But now to the music itself. In the first Beethoven Today video about symphonies number 1 and 2, I had already mentioned Beethoven's sketchbooks. He used to note down first ideas for new work in these sketchbooks, and so they give us a fascinating insight into the composer's workshop. We see that a lot of what we take for granted in the finished work had in actual fact undergone a laborious process of change and improvement. This is also the case with the Eroica. For example, who would have thought that the opening bars were originally meant to sound like this? Now, these chords of the dominant would have been possible, but how much more power and determination come from the two tonic chords which Beethoven finally decided upon. They signal this way and no other way. As so often with Beethoven, the first subject begins in a totally unspectacular way. A simple broken triad in E-flat major. But then, in the fifth bar of the subject, comes the surprise, a C-sharp which is not part of the E-flat key. With this note, the safe harmonic world of the triad is shattered. This sets off a symphonic discourse which stretches over 700 bars. 700 bars, a gigantic sonata movement which requires great concentration, also from listeners today. The main subject appears 3 times, first of all in the cello, then in woodwind and violins, and finally played by the whole orchestra. The bars which prepare the third appearance of the subject are of particular significance. Here Beethoven destroys the metric scheme 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 by accentuating 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We will meet this offbeat accentuation in various places in this movement, especially at points of dramatic culmination. Once the main subject has appeared for the third time, there is immediately a transitional passage, establishing the key of the dominant B-flat major. The second subject could begin here, but Beethoven continues in a transitional mode. This turns from an ascending melodic line into a passage with a characteristic rhythmic pattern. A resolute conclusion in fortissimo, and then, as a sharp contrast, follows the calm cantabile second subject. An exciting build-up from pianissimo to forte then leads to the final section of the exposition. You have now heard a great number of themes and motives. How does Beethoven succeed in drawing this rich musical material of the exposition into an organic entity? The answer lies in Beethoven's extraordinary feel for musical architecture. That means he gives each section exactly the right proportion and position. Here's an example. I had mentioned that after the transitional passage, the dominant key of B-flat major is established. According to the rules of sonata form, the second subject could appear now. So why does Beethoven not place it here? Because he wants to avoid uniformity. You see, the transitional passage and the second subject have the same relaxed cantabile character, and both are based on short, repeated motifs. Following each other immediately, this would cause a certain uniformity. So Beethoven feels he needs to build up a contrast, and he achieves this in the bars preceding the second subject. Also, in the first part of the development section, the transitional motive plays a leading role. First of all, it appears in the form we know. Then we find its characteristic rhythm in a short fugato. As you can hear, Beethoven uses here again the accentuation against the metric scheme, which I have mentioned before. And now he gets almost obsessed with this offbeat accentuation. He builds up an enormous climax with it, in which the held-back rhythmic energy seems about to explode any minute. And the culmination point he crowns with a biting dissonance. There has never been such a glaring, electrifying effect in symphonic music before. What now, after this moment of catastrophe and desperation? First of all, there are 4 decrescendo bars to release the tension. Then, as if descending from heaven, a wonderfully touching melody appears, played by the oboe. At the same time, there is an equally expressive cantilena in the violins and violoncelli. This episode has often been commented on. It has been said that here, in the development section, we have a completely new subject which has no relation to previous ones. This would be rather unusual, because a development section is supposed to use material from the exposition and not introduce anything essentially new. But a few commentators of the Eroica do see this allegedly new subject in connection with something previously heard. I belong decidedly to this minority. So let's take a closer look at this place. Interestingly enough, in his sketchbooks, Beethoven only noted down the lower part. This was the starting point. The upper part was added later. Let's hear the lower part once again. When we now look at the most prominent notes of this E minor melody, its silhouette, so to speak, we get the following. Here it is again, a simple broken triad as we know it from the main subject, which in E minor would sound like this. And here we have so This is one of Beethoven's devices to transform familiar material into something seemingly new. There is one more place in the development section which has often been commented on. Immediately before the recapitulation, Beethoven creates a long, tranquil section with no melodic profile. Everything is full of expectation for the entrance of the recapitulation. In this atmosphere of tense expectancy, suddenly the beginning of the main theme is heard in the horn. Let's hear this. On first hearing, this horn entry sounds strange, even wrong. Wrong not only because it abruptly cuts into the pianissimo whispering of the violins, but because it creates a short clash, a very sharp dissonance. When it came to this bar during the rehearsal for the premiere, Beethoven's pupil Ferdinand Ries allegedly shouted at the horn player and blamed him for being inattentive, whereupon Beethoven nearly slapped his pupil round the face. However that may have been, this place certainly has something special. Some commentators regard it as a sign of Beethoven's sense of humor. I think one should interpret it as an extended harmonic anticipation. The recapitulation is foreshadowed, so to speak. Looking at it psychologically, the tension is stretched to breaking point. In fact, Beethoven planned it like this right from the start. His sketchbook proves this. It is therefore absurd to correct the written text here, as some conductors did right up to the 20th century. In the expensive coda, several of the already heard themes and motives appear again.